What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 9 of season 4 of Succession, an episode called Church and State, an episode which reunites the dream team of writer Jesse Armstrong and director Mark Mylod, and they will be the dream team on the series finale next week as well. But good golly, Miss Molly, I feel like at this point, nearly every episode of this season is starting to feel as impactful emotionally as like a really good feature film. And that's a very rare, just killer thing. If you love film and television, just enjoy this sweet moment while it lasts, because these shows do not come around very often. And as I was watching this episode unfold, I just kept thinking to myself, like, maybe I'm a little on the cynical side, but I love how this revels in exposing all the bullshit. Like, to borrow a line from Apocalypse Now, the bullshit was stacking up so high you needed wings to stay above it. And seeing the way that a funeral can bring out some of people's grossest impulses or grossest aspirations, I mean, it was repugnant in a lot of ways, but it was just so refreshingly honest. Because whether you go to a funeral with 12 people or a funeral with 12,000, there are people who will try to milk a tragedy to their advantage or make it all about them. And so there was so much going on in terms of like great character beats and great plot developments. But I just feel like this show was such a refreshingly candid and such a brutal view of human nature. And I think the masterstroke of this episode was bringing back James Cromwell, who I've been enjoying in his role since like LA Confidential in the late 90s. But he's done an incredible job as Logan's brother Ewan, but obviously he's been absent all season. But he just brought some old world kind of integrity and sophistication and class, and so much about this show is like this perpetual kind of backstabbing Roman orgy where everybody is just being just like the nastiest piece of work imaginable, while, you know, making us laugh every step of the way. But you need a little bit of character to, I guess, to offer a little bit of contrast to the rest of the characters. It was just incredible to me. He opened with that brutal story about them trying to be quiet because they're worried about U-boats sinking their ships. And then the story about Logan never forgiving himself because he was led to believe that he brought home polio from school, which ultimately killed their little sister. But then Ewan starts to speak very candidly and very honestly about his brother. And the lines that I wrote down, I mean, he had a whole slew of them, but he said, "He has wrought the most terrible things, darkened the skies a little." I mean, we're all going to die sooner or later, and some of us care about what they're going to say about us after we're gone, and some of us do not. But holy cow. I guess I would hope that somebody as eloquent as Ewan would be there to say things about me, but I just hope that I leave a more favorable impression than the great Logan Roy. And I love that little beat as he's trying to take the podium, and both Greg and Shiv try and stop him, and he's like, what kind of family tries to stop a brother from speaking at his brother's funeral, all out of concern over the company's share price? It just shows how much, just what withering disdain he has for this entire extended family of theirs. But I'm jumping ahead, obviously. Let's wind things back to the beginning. So this episode served two major purposes. We get to see all the principal cast and characters saying goodbye to Logan Roy in their own way. And then we get to see the battle lines truly being drawn with Shiv and Lucas Matson on one side, Kendall and Roman on another, and the president-elect, pending all sorts of riots and legal chaos over the next 8 weeks, but he seems to be drifting over towards Lucas and Shiv's camp, and I have a feeling it's going to be just the battle of the century next episode, when it's basically, I imagine it's just going to be an extended boardroom sequence where you've got Frank and Jerry and Carl and Hugo and Kendall and Shiv and Tom and just everybody, probably even Greg, all just going to battle over the fate of this company. And it very easily could end up being like the best 60 to 90 minutes of TV that we will see this entire year and maybe for several years to come. But I don't know if anybody's heard any rumors, but like, what's Jesse Armstrong going to do next? I feel like no matter what he does, people are going to have probably unrealistically high expectations, but he's got a very tough act to follow. But goddamn, all signs are pointing toward really sticking the landing next week. But as always, I'd like to call attention to a few highlights. And one of the big highlights of this episode was just how many flashbacks I got to 2020. I stayed in New York throughout COVID and all the George Floyd protests, and as well as all the election insanity. And it seemed like for about 9 months, like I didn't know what shape New York was going to be when the dust finally settled. And it was just a crazy time to be here. And goddamn, like this episode, it almost gave me like eerily intense flashbacks just remembering. I mean, I had like 3 helicopters hovering above my building for like a month. And that sounds like nothing, but when you're trying to work or sleep or whatever, it just gives you this perpetual state of almost being like in a war zone. And I live pretty near Union Square, and it just got a little weird when a lot of the businesses and restaurants and bars and whatnot were all boarded up. And just, New York went a little crazy for a little while. And this episode perfectly reflected how New York's always kind of on the razor's edge of descending over into total anarchy, as we saw at the very end with Roman very foolishly provoking an entire street full of people and getting a fucking elbow to the face. Yeah, when you see a march going through New York, don't pick a fight. Although I did think it was an interesting detail that one of the protesters did try to help him up. Admittedly, Roman pushes him and didn't really want to accept that olive branch, but I thought that little helping hand was a key detail in that exchange. And what was incredible about this episode was how it maintained this kind of high wire act of giving you this ominous feeling of building dread and possible violence and fires in Baltimore and Kendall's wife taking the kids and fleeing upstate. Like, you really get the sense that there's like the kettle is boiling over nationwide, and yet they still find a way to insert some just withering comedy throughout this. And this is comedy that's got a very hard edge to it. But if you like diabolical, kind of evil, withering, condescending, just cynical comedy, this episode gave us a lot. I mean, a perfect example would be at the funeral. Roman at one point talks to Frank, and he's kind of sort of in his own way trying to make amends. And Frank says with like just complete and total utter sarcasm, "Life is short. We should all love one another." And I was like, whoa, that is brutal. I think Roman, he might have one person left on the planet that kind of likes him, and that's Kendall. And Kendall probably only likes him because he finds him useful. I find him hysterical, and he's one of my favorite characters on the show, but I find him hysterical because he's so insane in a lot of ways, but obviously doesn't have a lot of praiseworthy character attributes. And there was yet another ferocious line when Jerry's talking to Carl, Frank, and Carolina, and she asked them very frankly, "How much of you is glad?" I mean, that's just brutal. I mean, if you ask anybody in that room, a good number of them are probably anywhere from like 50 to 75% glad to see him gone. But a lot of the tears are really genuine as well. I mean, when Roman breaks down and is just inconsolable with grief, trying to get through his speech and looking at the casket containing his father, it felt real. I mean, if anybody in that room truly loved Logan to the core of his soul, in spite of all of his flaws, it would be Roman. And Roman obviously has been trying to kind of contain and disguise his grief, like even en route to the funeral when Shiv finally tells her brothers that she's pregnant. Immediately he just says, "Is it mine?" I mean, that's a classic Roman line. And then Kendall asks in total sincerity, "If it's Tom's," I mean, Jesus Christ. With brothers like these, like, who needs enemies? But then Roman talks about how he's going to jerk off when he watches her breastfeed. I mean, this is just disgusting. I mean, I come from a very large family with a lot of siblings, and we like to horse around and say some inappropriate jokes, but I've never told my sisters that I plan on having a wank while watching them breastfeed. I think that's, he's crossing some line. I don't know where the line is, but I have a feeling he's gone well and truly over it. But one of the craziest moments throughout the funeral is we see Carrie kind of lost, and she's crying, and she's kind of coming unglued. And she's invited by Shiv's mother to sit with her, and she's introduced to Sally Ann, who she explains, "Oh, like, this was my Carrie back in the day." And Marcia says hello, and suddenly you have a situation where widows and ex-girlfriends, they're all sitting in a row and, like, supporting each other, and, like, Marcia puts her hand on top of Carrie's. I mean, ay. That was just, I mean, if Logan were able to look down upon that row and comment on it, who the hell knows what he would say. But in a weird way, they all kind of got the final revenge, that they all obviously probably had their hearts torn out on multiple occasions and got emotionally abused on many occasions. But there they are, arms akimbo, supporting one another. And it was just only in a show like Succession do you see crazy shit like that. But there are so many amazing moments with the mother, like when she walks up to Shiv and she's kind of eyeing her up and down and knows she's pregnant, but Shiv's refusing to acknowledge it. I mean, it is one of the most icy exchanges you could possibly imagine. And then later on in the episode, when she's offering her full congratulations to Tom, Shiv jokes with the mother and just kind of writes off the child entirely. Says, "Oh, I'll never see the baby. I'm going to do the family way." I mean, Good God, Shiv's got some deep wounds and deep scars that go back decades, and yeah, that cycle's just going to repeat itself again and again and again. But getting back to the idea of how gross people can be when they're trying to exploit a funeral to their advantage, when Tom is slammed at work and he's unable to attend the funeral, Greg walks up to Shiv and offers to take his spot, bringing in the casket. But before Greg can even finish his sentence, the new husband of Shiv's mother is stepping in and offering to play that role, even though he didn't even know Logan. I mean, he is there. Like, I think they describe him like a Labrador rolling around in basically filth or celebrities. He's so excited to be included on the guest list. But thankfully, Greg gets to take that spot. But also, Greg, he's trying to work the whole funeral to his advantage as well. He wants to meet the president-elect. I mean, everybody is just embracing their grossest behavior imaginable. But Kendall somehow manages to rise to the occasion. He steps up there and he says his father was a brute, but he built things and he acted, and that he had a vitality and a force. And even though that force could be magnificent and awful all at once, he hopes some of that force is in him, and how Logan was comfortable, whether he was hanging out with royalty or hanging out in the homes where his content was broadcast to the world. He was comfortable with the world. He liked the world. He knew the world. And I feel like that was one of the best ways to kind of give Logan his send-off. Kendall obviously only knew part of his father, but he seemed to know that part of him really, really well. And I feel like that was an appropriate eulogy on his behalf. And when they finally get to the graveyard, we got some great gallows humor as Connor is showing all of his siblings this giant, tomb in which the casket is going to be placed. Logan did not want to be buried in the ground, but they're kind of examining the sides in the scene. There's plenty of real estate in there if anybody wants to claim the top bunk. So I've been at funerals in the past where a little gallows humor can go a long way. Sometimes people will just get, they just want to grieve in peace and they don't need the jokes. But these siblings, obviously, it's just their way of processing it. But there's another great line where Frank is talking to Shiv, and Shiv says, what was he really like? And Frank very honestly just says he was a salty dog, but he was a good egg. And many people might disagree, but I feel like, he was a mix of good and bad. Like, what you saw was what you got. He was the genuine article. He was authentic. He might have been an authentic asshole, but at least he was authentic, which is more than you can say for 95% of the people in this show. And speaking of being authentic, Kendall has a very honest moment with Hugo where he tells him he wants him to leak a story that certain family members on the board are souring on the deal with Gojo. And then he has this brilliant line, I think I got it word for word. He says, "This is an explicit plan to fuck the deal. Me rule the world, and you can come, and it won't be collaboration. You'll be my dog, but the scraps from the table will be millions. Happy?" And Hugo just says, woof, woof. I mean, Jesse Armstrong is a fucking genius, and he is rapidly becoming one of my favorite writers in either film or in television. I wonder if he has any aspirations to direct, because obviously, creatively, he's just a force to be reckoned with. And I feel like if he wants to be, he could take Aaron Sorkin and shove him aside and be like, all right, you had your day in the sun. Now it's my turn. But I really respond to the written word, whether you're talking about books or shows or flicks or whatever. Great writing is a very rare, wonderful, and beautiful thing. And Jesse Armstrong, he is packing all the gear, as my grandfather would say. And there were a couple of interesting details at the reception after the burial where we see that Logan's driver is still grieving. He also, like Roman, probably one of the only people that actually liked Logan quite a bit. And he's been talking to a shrink, and so Kendall just hires him on the spot. And he's like, talk to me. But then there was an incredible moment, which I kind of predicted in my video last week, where we see Mencken starting to turn on Kendall now that Mencken no longer needs Kendall, where Kendall basically is trying to suggest to have an exchange of ideas. And Mencken has this very ominous line where he says, "I thought you were the sound system. Now you want to choose the track." I mean, goddamn. You want to talk about having accidentally created a monster who now is going to break free of his chain and go off and do whatever the hell he wants. And when Kendall tries to be, kind of pin him down a little bit more, Mencken gives him this classic non-committal line, "We'll try to help." I mean, you're talking about Washington, D.C., bullshittery. And then before Kendall can go any further with his regulatory request, you've got Greg interrupting and introducing himself. And you've got Connor interrupting and wanting to talk about all kinds of nonsense. I mean, Jesus Christ. And then Shiv sees her moment, slips in, pulls him away to talk to Lucas Matson, and they pitch the whole idea of Shiv basically acting as an American CEO on behalf of Gojo so that it doesn't appear as if a foreign entity is taking over this giant legacy media empire. And even though Shiv clearly despises Mencken, like with all of her soul, like her father, she's flexible. I mean, in the end, Shiv is not altruistic in her goals. She might be on the left, but she's flexible, she says. And then she has a great line with Tom when he arrives. Tom shows up just absolutely bruised and battered and exhausted from just being up so goddamn long. And Shiv tells him, "You would have never missed Dad's funeral while he was alive." And then Tom just replies with a great zinger of his own. "Your dad has lost quite a lot of influence over the last few days." But soon enough, Tom is exhausted, he's weeping. And Shiv has a very rare, wonderful, affectionate moment where she tells him, go back to her place and get some sleep. And then she gets a call from Matsson. And this is a great Shiv moment, because I felt like last episode, she didn't necessarily have a lot of victories. But Matsson tells her it's a yes for her as CEO as far as he's concerned, and he thinks Mencken is interested. And the camera pushes in or zooms in on Shiv, and you get this wonderful, beautiful, killer look of confidence on her face as she's getting off the phone. And from across the room, Kendall can see her just like, reveling in this moment. And he just tells Roman, he fucked it. He tried to be Logan and he failed. Mencken has their dick in his hand when it should be the reverse. Kendall's got a plan, but he's going to need Roman's help. But Roman, he knows he fucked up at the funeral. He wanted to step up and be the next Logan. And he's just a mess, and he's drunk, and he's tired. But anyway, Kendall is plowing on ahead in spite of the fact that Roman seems to be dropping the ball right at the goal line. And to make matters worse, the video of Roman kind of sobbing and weeping and just being unable to talk in any way at the funeral, that video is starting to circulate. So his reputation, it's done. And I imagine nothing would make him happier than if he could just go hide out in the hospital for a few days after that attack from the protesters. But something tells me one elbow to the face is not going to get it done. But all we have to go on for next week is, I guess, I read some rumor somewhere, or not a rumor, but like Sarah Snook basically said the last episode feels like a feature film, and the teaser looked mean and nasty, so I could not be more excited. It's going to be a shame to see this show draw to a close, but I do have high hopes for HBO's Sunday night programming moving forward. The show The Idol, it's about to make its premiere at Cannes, or maybe it already did, the first 2 episodes, but we should be seeing some reviews in the near future to know whether or not that show even has a chance of kind of filling the hole in our heart that's going to be left by Succession. But I have absolutely no problem with a great show knowing when to leave the stage, leave us on a high note, leave us wanting more, and letting it go down as one of the all-time great shows. Whether you're talking about a show that reflects like our media landscape, our political landscape, just the New York landscape, but I feel like this show has just brilliantly reflected the crazy times in which we live, and it's made me laugh every step of the way. I have fucking loved every second of it. So yeah, I'll see all of y'all next Sunday, same time, same place, etc. and so forth. But if you want to talk more about the show, hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that notification bell to be notified about future videos. But I can't thank you for watching. Hope everybody has a great week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.